What would you do if one day you received everything that you have ever longed for? On one day, you receive this windfall that you've been praying for, that you've been hoping for, something that would dramatically change your life for the better. Right? Say it's the 649 or some other lottery. All of a sudden, your number comes in, and you are just showered with financial resources beyond your wildest dreams. What would you do? Would you walk away from it? Because that's what Peter, James, and John do. In our gospel reading, we hear about this miraculous catch of fish that they receive, and it's so large that both their boats begin to sink. Now that's a lot of fish. And it's safe to say that this was the catch that they always dreamed of. Yet when they get back to the shore, they leave it. And they walk away. And why would they do that? Well, the answer is quite simple. Peter, James, and John were not called to be fishermen anymore. Right? In forsaking the fish, they were embarking on a new life. Our gospel reading is not a miracle narrative saying that it's just a reading to show the power of Jesus to bless and to provide. It's very much a reading which is in similar fashion to our Isaiah reading, which is about the call of God. God calls Peter, God calls his companions to become disciples, to enter into a new way of life with a new mission and a new purpose. And that's, I think, the question for us to consider. How do we respond to the call of Jesus? How do we live out our identity as a disciple? This happens for Peter, I think, in three different kind of ways in our reading. James and John show up at the end of the account, but the reading really centers on the interaction of Jesus and Peter. And we see an interesting progression in this regard. The reading begins with Jesus standing by the lakeside teaching the crowds. Peter is in the water beside a boat washing his nets. And we know that from a conversation later that this is after a long night of catching no fish. Now for Peter, this would be disheartening, right? This was his profession. This was how he made his money. This was how he provided for his family. And it wasn't that they caught just a little bit of fish. No, they caught no fish. The whole evening was a bust. They didn't get anything. And now it was morning. It's like the only thing they could do was kind of lick their wounds. The only thing they could think about doing was washing their nets. So there's a sense of sadness in this scene. Jesus is teaching the crowd when this is happening, and they are pressing in on him. So he gets into Peter's boat, and he asks him to push a little from the shore. Now this is interesting because there is no evidence that Peter and Jesus knew each other at this point. Now Peter may have heard about Jesus, because after all, at this point, the word of Jesus had begun to spread, which is why the crowds are all around him, pressing in on him. So Peter may have heard about Jesus, but effectively, Peter just sees this strange man enter his boat and say, hey, push a little way from the shore. Peter obeys. Now, this is not actually that extraordinary, right? Peter is still in control of the boat. They are but a stone's throw away from the shore. Jesus is teaching the crowd, and Peter is just probably sitting there. But if the call of discipleship is a call to heed Jesus, to listen to his words, to follow his guidance, to respond to his presence, we can see here that Peter is making a mini move to becoming a disciple. This isn't the biggest stretch in the world, but at least now Peter is in the boat with Jesus. And that's important. Sometimes we think of being a disciple, we think that we naturally have to jump into the deep waters. We need to do these extraordinary things. When we think about the call to evangelize, to share our faith, or even just live out our faith, we think that we need to make big moves. But here, Jesus starts small with Peter. He doesn't ask him to do anything he doesn't know how to do. He stretches him, yes, because Jesus always calls us to grow. Jesus always calls us to be stretched. But he stretches Peter only just a little bit. Just move out a little bit from the shore. Just stretch yourself a little bit and trust me in that. And again, now Peter is in the boat. It might not have been the biggest thing, but now Jesus and Peter have a closer connection. And that closer connection serves that next moment of discipleship. Jesus finishes teaching the crowd, and so he turns to Simon Peter and says, "Put out into deep water and let down your nets for a catch of fish." This is a bigger stretch. It demands a bolder expression of faith and trust and hope. It demands a radical witness to follow Jesus. Now, Jesus tells Peter exactly what's going to happen. If you let down your nets, you will catch some fish. Peter isn't quite sure about this. "Master, we have worked hard all night and haven't caught anything." Peter's experience up to this moment is that this is never going to work. Right? Because they've tried catching fish all night, probably in every single place around the lake. But he's like, it's not going to work. The fish aren't there. They are not biting. I'm a terrible fisherman. This is just not going to work. So this is going to be disastrous, he thinks. He doubts what's going to happen. And yet there is something within Peter that calls him to obey. There's something about what he's heard from Jesus, or even just his interaction with Jesus in that boat, where he thinks, you know what, because he said so, I'm going to do this. Because you say so, Jesus, I will let down the nets. But he's probably still not quite sure. Do you remember when Michael Harvey was with us, speaking about being an inviting church? He talked about being a follower of Jesus. He talked about inviting others to explore faith in church. And one of the things he reminded us of is that Jesus is in charge of the process. We are called to invite, to put ourselves in the position to receive those who Jesus calls to us, but Jesus is the evangelist. Just as here, Jesus is the fisherman. Peter doesn't catch the fish. Jesus catches the fish. Jesus causes the fish to come. Peter is called to make himself available for that catch. Just like that there might be some people here who Jesus is calling just to stretch, just a little bit. Just push out a little bit from the shore. Trust me, it won't be that bad. Perhaps there are people here who Jesus is calling out into the deep waters. Where are you called to risk? To be bold in your discipleship? Where does Jesus call you out of your safety net? See, when we follow Jesus in this way, one of the things that this shows us is that Jesus can cause the miraculous to take place. How blessed it is to experience the miraculous hand of Jesus working in our lives and around our lives. And that's Peter's experience. This catch is so extraordinary. It's to the point that it's almost ludicrously excessive. It's so large that Peter calls his companions, and both boats begin to sink. He calls James and John and says, "Get over here." And they come with the second boat. They start filling the second boat, and it almost begins to sink along with the first. This is a retirement catch of fish. This catch would set up Peter, James, and John for life. Right? This was the windfall. This was the 649. Peter, in faith, somehow seems to recognize that something deeper is going on. He doesn't quite get what it is. So Peter thinks that this is going to be a scene of judgment. Very much like Isaiah. In our reading from Isaiah, when Isaiah kind of comes into the presence of God and says, woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips. Peter can only see his shortcomings. And so he assumes that this great Jesus who caused all of this stuff to happen, Jesus is just going to turn on me. And so he says, "Get away from me, Lord." Now notice, he doesn't call him master anymore. Master, which is probably better rendered sir or mister. It's not necessarily a term of authoritative respect or something like that. So get away from, he doesn't call him sir anymore. He calls him Lord. "Get away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Sometimes what stops us from fully living as disciples is the belief that we are not good enough. The belief that Jesus is just going to turn his face against us. That somehow Jesus is going to wake up one day, recognize, "Oh my Lord, why did I call them?" and then just turn his back on us. We think that there's something in ourselves that will mean that Jesus will not love us or Jesus will not accept us. And because he won't love us or accept us, Jesus would never actually call us to live as disciples. But Jesus does not deny Peter. He does not shun him. He does not cast him out. Jesus accepts Peter. He loves him. He reassures him. He says, "Don't be afraid, Peter." But then he calls him to something more. "From now on, you will be a catcher of people," he says. Now, the English doesn't do justice to what Jesus says here. The verb to catch, or in some translations you might read, "I will make you a fisher of people." The verb there means something messy like to take for life, as in to catch something in order to keep it alive. That's kind of what the word would best be translated as. So Jesus calls Peter to be someone who is to help others enter into the very life that Peter has found. Life with Jesus is the most satisfying, the most abundant, the most blessed, the most grace-filled, the most miraculous life that one can imagine. And Peter, James, and John are called to help others experience it in the presence of Jesus, which is why they leave the fish behind. Because in contrast to the new life with Jesus, a pile of smelly fish just does not compare. So they walk away. They follow Jesus, which is the ultimate expression of discipleship. Now, Peter might not know what this looks like. He walks off into the unknown. But the lesson of the catch of fish points him to the reality that just as Jesus was the one who caused fish to be caught, despite Peter's doubt, so too will Jesus call people to new life when Peter acts in faith and follows Jesus. Do not be afraid. How can you help someone catch new life? If you, like Peter, are called to follow Jesus, to be a catcher of people, how might you help someone catch new life? How might you help someone know Jesus more? How might you be stretched to do that? There's been some interesting expressions of this in our own community. Somebody called me on Monday from our Monday book study and called the office and said, I haven't seen a member of the book study for a couple weeks, so I'm going to call them and see how they are. Is that okay? Wonderful. Imagine if we had the habit of looking around the room and noticing who isn't here and giving them a call afterwards and saying, "You know what, I didn't see you at church and I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing." Do you think that might help someone know the love of Jesus more? Do you think that might help someone have this vision of a new life which they are called to within a Christian community? Another person called me and said, "I have this idea. Can I put an ad on Kijiji saying if people are interested in the church, then I could talk with them about that, talk to them about Holy Cross, invite them to Holy Cross, and then I could sit with them and help them through the service." Now, if you don't know Kijiji is a site online where you kind of buy and sell things, but it also has this community forum. So this person, can I put an ad there about, hey, why don't you come to church with me? And I have to admit, in that moment, I was like Peter, this is never going to work. like really? This is not going to work at all. But sometimes Jesus stretches us just a little bit. So they put the ad up right at the time when somebody actually was looking on Kijiji, wanting some sort of church connection. And so they reached out to our parishioner. They had a conversation. Actually, they had multiple conversations. And that person actually came to see me because they really needed to talk. And they wanted to receive prayer, and they wanted to receive anointing. Right? The miraculous took place. How are you stretched just a little bit to get into the boat with Jesus? And to begin to enter into that call of discipleship. How might you be called to risk, to be bold, to push out into those deep waters, to hear the words of Jesus and to let down your nets in anticipation that Jesus is going to act? How are you called to set your face and follow Jesus wherever Jesus is leading you? When we live out our discipleship, we are able to see Jesus act miraculously in ways that we may never have expected. But it does take a sense of boldness for us. Jesus calls us, push out a little farther. Enter the deep waters with me. Follow me and catch people for new life. May we each uncover just how miraculous it is to respond to his call of discipleship. Amen.